Spring 1943. American pilots arrive at their English airfield expecting sleek Spitfires. Instead, they find a 7-ton monster sitting on the tarmac. One pilot calls it a milk bottle with wings. Another says it looks like a flying bathtub. They nickname it the Jug, and not as a compliment. The P-47 Thunderbolt is the ugliest fighter anyone has ever seen, twice as heavy as any other fighter, and pilots absolutely hate it. But 3 years later, this ridiculous-looking airplane will have destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft, produced more aces than any other American fighter, and earned a reputation as the most indestructible warbird ever built. One fighter group will refuse to trade their ugly jugs for the beautiful P-51 Mustang, proving that sometimes the ugliest machine makes the most deadly weapon. This is the story of the aircraft that went from laughingstock to legend. Stay until the end to discover why modern ground attack jets still carry the Thunderbolt name. June 1940. Alexander Kartveli sat on a train from Wright Field, Ohio, back to New York, sketching furiously on the back of an envelope. The Georgian immigrant and chief engineer of Republic Aviation had just attended a meeting that destroyed 6 months of his work. His lightweight fighter design, the XP-47, was obsolete before it flew. The war in Europe had proven one brutal fact: lightweight fighters got shot down. American military observers watching the Battle of France reported back with alarming details. German fighters had heavy armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and substantial firepower. British Spitfires and Hurricanes survived because they matched this protection. Lightweight fighters with minimal armor and weak armament didn't last long against Messerschmitt Bf-109s, bristling with cannon and machine guns. At the Wright Field meeting, Army Air Corps requirements had changed dramatically. The new fighter must have a ceiling of 40,000 feet, maximum speed exceeding 400 miles per hour at optimum altitude, and no fewer than 6 heavy machine guns mounted in the wings. Better yet, mount 8 guns. The fighter needed armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and range to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. Kartveli listened to these specifications and did mental calculations. His lightweight XP-47 design could never meet these requirements. The anemic Allison V1710 engine simply lacked power. Adding armor, guns, ammunition, and fuel would turn the lightweight fighter into an overweight failure. He needed to start over completely, but there was no time. War was coming, and America needed fighters immediately. On that train ride, Kartveli made decisions that would define his career. If lightweights were obsolete, he would build something massive. Instead of the Allison engine producing 1,150 horsepower, he would use the new Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial, producing 2,000 horsepower. That engine required a turbocharger for high-altitude performance, which meant complex ducting running from nose to tail through the fuselage belly. Based on an estimated combat weight of 12,000 pounds, more than twice his original design, Kartveli sketched a semi-elliptical wing with 300 square feet of area. The proportions looked right. 8 50 caliber machine guns would require significant wing space for ammunition. 4 guns in each wing, staggered to allow side-by-side ammunition boxes holding 350 rounds each. Total ammunition load, 2,800 rounds, giving about 30 seconds of continuous fire. When Kartveli's assistant, Mish Roth, later recalled that train ride, he said Kartveli had drawn the airplane almost exactly as it would eventually be built, all from calculations done mentally and sketched on an envelope. By the time they reached New York, Kartveli had the basic design complete. Now he just had to convince the Army to buy a fighter that would dwarf everything else in the sky. Kartveli presented his design proposal for the XP-47B to the U.S. Army Air Corps on June 12, 1940. Military officials were skeptical. The proposed fighter would be enormous, the heaviest single-engine fighter ever conceived. Empty weight alone would exceed 9,900 pounds. Fully loaded for combat, the airplane would weigh over 12,000 pounds. potentially reaching 13,600 pounds with maximum fuel and ammunition. But the Army had few alternatives. European combat had proven that American fighter designs were obsolete. The P-40 Warhawk, P-39 Airacobra, and P-38 Lightning were already in development, but none fully met the new requirements. Cartveli's proposal promised performance that seemed almost too good: 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet altitude, and ability to reach 15,000 feet in just 5 minutes, despite its weight. On September 6, 1940, the Army ordered one prototype. 1 week later, on September 13th, they ordered 161 P-47Bs and 602 P-47Cs for production before the prototype even flew. The contract totaled $56,499,924. It was an enormous gamble. If Cartveli's design failed, the money would be wasted and America would lack fighters when war came. Republic Aviation began construction immediately. The airplane was unlike anything built before. The R-2800 engine sat in a broad elliptical cowling that opened at the front like a horse collar, admitting cooling air for the engine, oil coolers, and turbo-supercharger intercooler system. Exhaust gases were routed through wastegate-equipped pipes running along each side of the cockpit to drive the turbo-supercharger turbine mounted in the fuselage belly, roughly halfway between cockpit and tail. The propeller presented unique challenges. The R-2800's tremendous power required a 4-bladed Curtiss Electric constant-speed propeller measuring 12 feet in diameter. Providing ground clearance for this massive propeller while keeping guns low enough in the wings for ammunition storage seemed impossible. Cartveli solved it with telescopic landing gear that compressed 9 inches during retraction, shortening enough when retracted to fit inside the wing, but extending fully for landing to provide adequate propeller clearance. The cockpit was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. Test pilots would later describe the seat as being like a lounge chair. The air-conditioned cockpit featured excellent visibility, though early versions used a hinged cockpit that proved problematic at high altitudes. Self-sealing fuel tanks sat under the cockpit, holding 305 gallons total. Armor plate protected the pilot from behind and below. On May 6, 1941, just 8 months after the prototype was ordered, test pilot Lowry Lawson Brabham took off from Republic's factory airfield at Farmingdale, New York, and flew the XP-47B to Mitchell Field. The first flight revealed minor problems like cockpit smoke from an oil drip, but overall performance impressed everyone. During testing, the XP-47B demonstrated its promised speed of 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet altitude, an ability to reach 15,000 feet in just 5 minutes despite its weight. Cartveli had been right. His dinosaur had good proportions. But would pilots accept flying a fighter that weighed as much as a medium bomber? January 1943. The 56th Fighter Group arrived in England aboard the Queen Elizabeth, converted from luxury liner to troop transport, carrying 12,000 men. The pilots had trained on P-47s in Connecticut, but had hoped they might receive Spitfires once reaching England. Instead, they found more Thunderbolts waiting at their base near Horsham St. Faith. The pilots' first impressions were not favorable. Lieutenant James Goodson of the 4th Fighter Group, who had previously flown Spitfires with the RAF, stared at the massive P-47 in disbelief. After flying the delicate, fingertip-responsive Spitfire, he now faced 7 tons of airplane that looked like it belonged hauling Congo, not fighting enemy fighters. Goodson later wrote that pilots called it a 7-ton milk bottle. Captain Don Blakeslee, an experienced RAF Eagle Squadron veteran with multiple aerial victories and Spitfires, was even more direct. After his first P-47 flight, he complained loudly that it was daunting to haul 7 tons of plane around the sky after the fingertip touch needed for the Spitfire. The P-47 seemed heavy, sluggish, unresponsive. Everything took more effort. More force on the stick, more time to accelerate, more runway to take off and land. The nicknames that emerged weren't compliments. Jug was most common, referring to the airplane's resemblance to a common milk jug of the era. Some pilots claimed it stood for juggernaut, but that was charitable revisionism. Others called it the 7-ton milk bottle, big ugly, repulsive scatterbolt, bucket of bolts, and cast iron beast, One pilot compared its profile to a flying bathtub. Radio problems plagued early operations. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, experienced multiple radio failures that forced him to abort missions. On May 4, 1943, during the group's first escort mission over Antwerp, Zemke lost radio communication over the Dutch coast and had to turn back, leaving command to Colonel Lorene McCullum. Zemke was furious, worried his pilots would think he abandoned them. That first escort mission ended in tragedy. In the heat of combat, McCullum shot down the first aircraft he saw, which turned out to be a British Spitfire, not a German fighter. The accident devastated McCullum and put Zemke under scrutiny from superiors. The P-47's teething problems were not just mechanical. Performance issues became apparent quickly. The P-47's rate of climb was disappointing compared to lighter fighters. Acceleration was slow. In turning fights, lighter enemy fighters could outturn the heavy Thunderbolt. Many pilots wondered if the Army had made a terrible mistake ordering thousands of these overweight machines. But there was one flight regime where the P-47 excelled beyond all expectations: the dive. In level flight, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or Focke-Wulf FW-19 could match or exceed the P-47's speed. But when Thunderbolts rolled over and dove, nothing could follow. The P-47 could dive faster than any other fighter, reaching speeds that would tear apart lighter aircraft. And it could pull out of those dives safely, its robust construction handling loads that would break other planes.
Hub Zemke refused to let his pilots wallow in complaints. He had spent time as a combat observer with the Royal Air Force in 1940, watching the Battle of Britain and studying Luftwaffe tactics. He understood that success in combat depended less on aircraft performance and more on tactics that exploited strengths while minimizing weaknesses. Zemke developed what became known as dive, fire, and recover tactics. The P-47 struggled in turning dogfights, but excelled diving from altitude. Therefore, Zemke drilled his squadrons to patrol at high altitude above bomber formations. When German fighters appeared, P-47s would dive on them from above, fire deadly bursts from 8 50 caliber machine guns, and zoom back to altitude using momentum from the dive. The tactics required discipline. Pilots had to resist the temptation to follow enemy fighters down into turning battles where the P-47's weight became a disadvantage. The key was altitude advantage, diving attack, and immediate recovery to altitude. German pilots quickly learned to fear the Thunderbolt's diving attacks. The concentrated firepower of 8 50 caliber guns hitting at high closing speed was devastating. On June 13, 1943, Zemke scored his first 2 aerial victories, shooting down 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190s over Kassel while flying a P-47 marked Moy Tovarish. 2 days later, Captain Gerald W. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron became the first ace in the 56th Fighter Group and the second in the European Theater of Operations, all flying the maligned Thunderbolt. August 17, 1943, brought the P-47's baptism by fire during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. The 56th Fighter Group provided penetration support for B-17s of the 4th Bomb Wing headed to Regensburg in the morning, returned to base to rearm and refuel, then flew withdrawal support for the 1st Bomb Wing returning from Schweinfurt in the afternoon. In a running 20-minute battle across Belgium, the 56th claimed 17 German fighters destroyed for the loss of 3 P-47s and pilots. Pilots began appreciating the P-47's survivability. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski reported that one of his squadron members took 5 direct 20mm cannon hits in his right wing, but still managed to return to base. Major Don Blakeslee's Thunderbolt was hit by 68 cannon shells during one sortie, yet he flew back to England escorted by Major Goodson. Stories spread of P-47s returning with massive damage that would have destroyed other fighters. The rugged air-cooled R-2800 engine proved incredibly resilient. Liquid-cooled engines like those in P-51 Mustangs or P-38 Lightnings could be disabled by a single hit, puncturing coolant lines. The R-2800 could lose entire cylinders and keep running. Its 18 cylinders provided redundancy that saved countless pilots. Pilots discovered that the P-47's spacious, armored cockpit and robust structure provided exceptional protection. During crash landings, the extensive ductwork filling the fuselage belly acted as a cushion between pilot and ground. Multiple pilots survived crashes that would have been fatal in lighter aircraft. One pilot remarked, "When flying the Jug, I always felt as if I was in my mother's arms." Gradually, grudging acceptance turned to genuine affection. Lieutenant Will Bergsteiner of the 395th Fighter Group wrote in his diary, "We never realized we loved the old barrel and her 8 guns so much." The nickname Jug lost its derisive edge and became a term of endearment. The ugly fighter was proving its worth in the crucible of combat. By autumn 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had transformed from skeptical P-47 pilots into believers. Under Hub Zemke's leadership, they developed into the most effective fighter group in the 8th Air Force. Their aggressive tactics and growing expertise earned them the nickname Zemke's Wolfpack. The wolves were hunting, and their prey was the Luftwaffe. Zemke continuously refined tactics. He developed the Zemke Fan, a formation where fighters rendezvoused at a prominent landmark ahead of bomber formations, then scattered in a 180-degree arc, each flight covering a sector. This flexible formation allowed fighters to intercept German attackers before they reached the bombers, while maintaining mutual support. The 8th Air Force eventually adopted modified versions of the Zemke Fan for all fighter groups. The success of the 56th attracted attention. By early 1944, a friendly rivalry developed between Zemke's P-47-equipped 56th Fighter Group and Colonel Don Blakeslee's P-51 Mustang-equipped 4th Fighter Group. Both competed for the highest score of enemy aircraft destroyed. Newspapers back home followed the competition, making celebrities of top aces like Zemke, Gabreski, and Robert S. Johnson. Big Week in February 1944 demonstrated the P-47's maturity. During Operation Argument, a week-long series of massive bombing raids against German aircraft production facilities, P-47s flew continuous escort missions. On March 6, 1944, during a Berlin escort mission, the 56th claimed 18 Bf-190s destroyed for the loss of 3 P-47s, and Zemke was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership during that mission. March 16, 1944, saw the 56th Fighter Group record its 350th aerial victory. In just 1 year of combat, Zemke's Wolfpack had shot down 350 German aircraft while establishing themselves as the premier fighter unit in Europe. They had accomplished this flying the ugly fighter that everyone initially hated. Individual pilots became legendary. Captain Robert S. Johnson scored 27 aerial victories flying P-47s with the 56th Fighter Group. His book, Thunderbolt, written with aviation author Martin Caidin in 1958, became a bestseller that introduced thousands of readers to the P-47's combat record. Johnson's most famous mission occurred on June 26, 1943, when his badly damaged P-47 limped home after surviving sustained attacks by German fighters. The airplane's toughness saved his life. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, also of the 56th, scored 28 aerial victories in P-47s, tying Pacific Theater ace Major Bong for most victories in the USAF at that time. Gabreski had previously flown Spitfires with the RAF, but came to prefer the Thunderbolt. He praised its roomy cockpit, nice handling characteristics, and truly spectacular dive performance. The emergence of the P-51 Mustang as the 8th Air Force's primary long-range escort fighter in mid-1944 might have relegated the P-47 to secondary status. The Mustang was faster, more agile, had longer range, and looked elegant compared to the chunky Thunderbolt. Most fighter groups eagerly transitioned to Mustangs, but Zemke's 56th Fighter Group refused. They wanted to keep their Jugs.
Summer 1944 brought a decision point for the 56th Fighter Group. The Army Air Forces offered to re-equip them with P-51 Mustangs, the new darling of fighter pilots. The Mustang had superior range, climbed faster, turned tighter, and was undeniably more beautiful. Every other P-47 group in the 8th Air Force jumped at the chance to trade their Thunderbolts for Mustangs, but the 56th said no. This decision shocked many observers. The Mustang was objectively superior in most performance metrics. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back without refueling. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided better high-altitude performance than the R-2800. In dogfights, it could outturn both the P-47 and German fighters. Why would experienced combat pilots choose to keep an inferior fighter? The answer revealed what veterans had learned through hard combat experience. performance numbers don't tell the whole story. The P-47 had one quality that no performance chart could measure: survivability. Pilots who had flown both types knew that the Mustang, while faster and more agile, was fragile. Its liquid-cooled engine could be disabled by a single hit. Its lighter construction meant less protection for the pilot. The R-2800 radial engine in the P-47 could absorb tremendous battle damage and keep running. Multiple pilots had returned to base with cylinders shot away, oil lines severed, and massive holes in the engine, yet the double wasp kept turning. The P-47's heavy structure and extensive armor meant pilots survived hits that would kill them in a Mustang. When choosing between performance and survival, veterans chose survival. The 56th decision proved prescient. As the war moved into its final year, ground attack missions became increasingly important. The Allied armies advancing through France and into Germany needed close air support. P-47s, with their robust construction and heavy firepower, excelled at ground attack. The Thunderbolt could dive through intense anti-aircraft fire, deliver bombs and rockets, strafe ground targets, and absorb hits that would bring down lighter aircraft. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, P-47 pilots had mastered both air superiority and ground attack roles. Thunderbolts of the 9th Air Force, dedicated to tactical air support, devastated German armor, troops, transport, and airfields during the Normandy invasion and subsequent breakout. They flew multiple missions daily, shuttling between forward airstrips and targets just miles ahead of advancing infantry. The P-47's weapons load impressed everyone. It could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs, equivalent to half the bomb load of a B-17 Flying Fortress heavy bomber. It could carry 10 5-inch rockets, devastating against tanks and fortifications. And it still had 8 50 caliber machine guns with 3,400 rounds of ammunition. This combination of bombs, rockets, and guns made the P-47 the most effective ground attack fighter of World War II. German soldiers learned to fear the sound of the R-2800. When Thunderbolts appeared overhead, enemy columns scattered. The concentrated firepower of 8 machine guns could destroy vehicles, kill troops in the open, and suppress anti-aircraft positions. Bombs and rockets destroyed bridges, ammunition dumps, fuel depots, and countless other targets. German commanders reported that air attacks severely hampered their ability to move forces and supplies. The Wolfpack continued hunting through 1944 and into 1945. Colonel David C. Schilling took command when Zemte transferred to the 479th Fighter Group in August 1944. The 56th maintained its aggressive spirit and high victory count. By war's end, Zemke's Wolfpack would be the top-scoring U.S. fighter group of the 8th Air Force with 665.5 recognized aerial kills, plus an additional 311 ground kills. The numbers tell the story of the P-47's combat effectiveness, though statistics alone cannot capture the full impact. Between 1943 and 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts flew 746,000 sorties of all types. This massive operational tempo exceeded any other American fighter. The P-47 was everywhere: Europe, Pacific, China, Burma, India, North Africa, Italy. Aerial combat statistics were impressive. P-47 pilots destroyed approximately 7,000 enemy aircraft during World War II. Of these, over 3,500 were aerial victories, enemy planes shot down in air-to-air combat. The remainder were destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks. The air-to-air kill-to-loss ratio was 4.6 to 1, meaning for every P-47 lost in air combat, American pilots shot down 4.6 enemy aircraft. 3,499 P-47s were lost to all causes in combat. This sounds like a high number until compared against total production. 15,683 P-47s were built, more than any other American fighter type. Loss rate per sortie averaged 0.7%, extraordinarily low for a fighter that flew into heavy combat throughout the war. The P-47's robust construction kept loss rates far below lighter, more vulnerable fighters. Ground attack statistics were even more impressive.
P-47s destroyed approximately 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railroad cars, 68,000 trucks, and 6,000 armored vehicles. They demolished bridges, ammunition dumps, fuel depots, and countless other targets. German commanders reported that air attacks severely hampered their ability to move forces and supplies. Luftwaffe ace Hans Bahr, who scored 220 aerial victories during the war, offered the ultimate enemy compliment. He said the P-47 could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. Coming from one of Germany's top fighter pilots, this assessment validated everything American pilots had learned about their tough fighter. The 56th Fighter Group's record exemplified P-47 effectiveness. Over roughly 2 years of combat operations, 56 pilots totaled 665.5 aerial victories, about 100 more than the second highest scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force. The 56th produced 39 aces, including the European theater's 2 leading American aces, Francis Gaprasky with 28 victories and Robert S. Johnson with 27 victories. Hub Zemke himself was credited with 17.75 confirmed victories in 154 combat missions. His leadership created the most effective fighter unit in the 8th Air Force. When Zemke transferred to the 479th Fighter Group in August 1944, he attempted to apply his lessons learned to a struggling unit equipped with P-38 Lightnings converting to P-51 Mustangs. He scored 3 more victories before being shot down over Germany on October 30, 1944, and spending the remainder of the war as a prisoner. Medal of Honor recognition came to P-47 pilots in both theaters. Colonel Neil E. Kirby of the 348th Fighter Group in the Pacific received the Medal of Honor for action over Wewak, New Guinea on October 11, 1943. Leading a flight of 4 P-47s, Kirby encountered 40 Japanese planes and shot down 6 in the ensuing combat. First Lieutenant Raymond L. Knight of the 350th Fighter Group was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for actions over northern Italy on April 24 and 25, 1945, repeatedly leading attacks on enemy airfields despite intense anti-aircraft fire. Production numbers reflected confidence in the design. Republic Aviation built 15,683 Thunderbolts between 1941 and November 1945. Curtiss Wheel built additional units under license. This made the P-47 the most produced American fighter of World War II, surpassing even the famous P-51 Mustang. The ugly fighter that nobody wanted in 1943 became the fighter that won the war.
As 1945 began, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Allied air superiority was complete. Yet the 56th Fighter Group continued operations, now equipped with the ultimate Thunderbolt variant, the P-47M. This specialized model featured a more powerful R-2857 engine producing 2,300 horsepower, allowing speeds exceeding 460 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. The P-47M was designed specifically to catch German jet aircraft. The revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 and rocket-powered Me-163 were the Luftwaffe's last technological advantages, capable of speeds far exceeding conventional piston-engine fighters. The P-47M, while still slower than jets, could match them during certain flight regimes, particularly during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable. Engine troubles initially plagued the P-47M. Improper sealing during Atlantic transport allowed humid ocean air to corrode pistons. After multiple accidents and forced landings, the 56th Fighter Group was grounded in February 1945 while replacement engines were procured. Pilots reluctantly began training on P-51 Mustangs, fearing they would lose their beloved Thunderbolts. But by March 25th, the engine problems were resolved and the Wolfpack returned to operations in P-47Ms. Despite the paucity of targets, the P-47M distinguished itself exactly as designed. On March 14, 1945, 3 P-47s from the 62nd Fighter Squadron swooped down on 2 low-flying Erido 234B jet bombers targeting the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. The P-47Ms matched the jet's speed and shot down both. On March 25th, Major George Bostwick and Wingman Edwin Crosswaite destroyed 2 Me-262s as they attempted to land at Parcham Airfield. The 56 final aerial victories came on April 10, 1945, when Lieutenants Walter Sharbow and Bill Wilkerson shot down 2 more Me-262s over Muritz Lake. 3 days later, after failing to encounter enemy fighters, the Wolfpack conducted one final devastating strike. Swooping down on Arabeck Airfield, their 8,500 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition destroyed 95 parked German aircraft. New experimental T-48 incendiary rounds, designed specifically to ignite kerosene jet fuel, proved especially effective. After the German surrender on May 8, 1945, the final tally was calculated. Zemke's Wolfpack ended the war as the top-scoring United States fighter group of the 8th Air Force with 665.5 recognized aerial kills plus 311 ground kills, 1,000 aircraft destroyed. They achieved this flying exclusively the P-47 Thunderbolt, the only 8th Air Force group that refused to trade their jugs for Mustangs. The P-47M models claimed only 15 aerial victories, serving after the Luftwaffe was largely defeated. But 12 P-47Ms were lost in accidents and 2 were shot down by ground fire. Not one fell in air-to-air combat. The ultimate evolution of the ugly fighter remained undefeated in the sky until war's end. While European operations dominated American attention, P-47s also served extensively in the Pacific theater, though their story is less well known. The 348th Fighter Group, flying from Port Moresby, New Guinea, introduced Thunderbolts against Japanese forces in 1943. Operating in the jungle, heat, and humidity of the Southwest Pacific presented different challenges than European combat. Range limitations initially hampered Pacific operations. The vast distances between islands required longer range fighters than early P-47 variants could provide. Republic addressed this by developing the P-47N, featuring a completely redesigned wing with increased fuel capacity. Introduced in April 1945, the P-47N could escort B-29 superfortresses on missions against the Japanese home islands. Japanese pilots respected the Thunderbolt's firepower and toughness. In turning dogfights, the lighter, more maneuverable Japanese fighters had advantages, but P-47s using boom and zoom tactics similar to those developed by Zemke proved effective. Diving attacks from altitude, heavy firepower, and immediate recovery to altitude minimized the P-47's weaknesses while exploiting its strengths. Ground attack proved equally important in the Pacific. P-47s devastated Japanese airfields, destroyed shipping in harbors, and supported amphibious landings. The robust construction that saved lives in Europe proved equally valuable against Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Stories circulated of P-47s returning with entire sections of wing or tail shot away, damage that would doom other aircraft. Colonel Neil Kirby's October 11, 1943 action over WWII, New Guinea exemplified Pacific P-47 operations. Leading 4 Thunderbolts against 40 Japanese aircraft, Kirby's aggressive tactics and accurate shooting destroyed 6 enemy planes. Though he was later shot down and killed on March 5, 1944, his Medal of Honor recognized the P-47's effectiveness in the demanding Pacific environment. The P-47N arrived in theater as the war entered its final months. These long-range variants participated in the final bombing campaign against Japan, escorting B-29 superfortresses and conducting fighter sweeps over Japanese airfields. When Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945, P-47s remained in frontline service across the Pacific, ready to support the planned invasion that never came. Production of P-47 Thunderbolts ended in November 1945 as the war concluded. Republic Aviation had built 15,683 examples of the chunky fighter. They remained in service with the United States Air Force, formed from the Army Air Forces in 1947 through the late 1940s. Many were transferred to Air National Guard units, where they served into the mid-1950s. The P-47 saw combat once more during the early months of the Korean War. Some F-47 models, as they were redesignated in 1948, flew ground attack missions from Japanese bases before jet fighters completely replaced piston-engine aircraft. The old Warrior acquitted itself well in this final combat appearance, its robust construction and heavy firepower still relevant in modern warfare. Alexander Kartvelny's career continued beyond the Thunderbolt. He designed the F-84 Thunderjet, one of America's first operational jet fighters.
and later the F-105 Thunder Chief, a supersonic fighter-bomber that saw extensive service during the Vietnam War. Both aircraft carried design philosophies from the P-47: robust construction, heavy weapons load, and emphasis on survivability above all else. Kartveli remained with Republic Aviation until retirement. The P-47's spiritual successor arrived in 1976 when Fairchild Republic introduced the A-10 Thunderbolt II. This dedicated ground attack aircraft was nicknamed the Warthog for its unconventional appearance, echoing the original Thunderbolt's reputation as an ugly but effective warrior. The A-10 carries a massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the modern equivalent of the P-47's 850 caliber machine guns, and shares the same philosophy: heavy firepower, robust construction, and survivability above all else. Today, surviving P-47s are prized warbirds, painstakingly restored and flown at air shows. The distinctive sound of the R-2800 engine brings aviation enthusiasts to tears. Pristine examples command millions of dollars, their value reflecting both historical importance and rarity. Museums worldwide display Thunderbolts, telling new generations about the ugly fighter that won the war. In 2015, Indiana designated the P-47 as its official state aircraft, honoring Republic's Aviation's Evangelist factory that produced thousands of Thunderbolts. The Indiana Thunderbolts minor league hockey team takes its name from the famous fighter, maintaining the legacy in popular culture. Indiana's pride in its contribution to World War II victory centers on the airplane that local workers built. The lessons of the P-47 story remain relevant. Appearance doesn't determine capability. Initial impressions can be wrong. Persistence through early failures leads to eventual success. Robust engineering that emphasizes reliability and survivability over raw performance creates systems that work in real-world conditions. And sometimes the best weapon is the one that brings its operators home alive, not the one that looks best on paper. Hub Zemke's legacy extended far beyond his wartime achievements. After liberation from German prisoner of war camps, he continued serving in the United States Air Force, retiring as a colonel. He wrote extensively about his experiences, sharing tactical lessons with new generations of fighter pilots.